Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Beyond Resilience. My name is Marcia Smith. I'm the president of Firelight Media. Firelight is 20 years old this year. We exist as an organization to support emerging and mid-career filmmakers, documentary filmmakers of color. Just to say a word about this program. This is the July 17th edition of Beyond Resilience, which is a series of curated conversations that explore the challenges, strategies, and experiences of creating and distributing work during a time of crisis. Our slate of conversations takes a global and historical view of films created by filmmakers of color during critical periods of disaster, seeking to learn from those filmmakers, from their communities, and the resilience born from collective experiences. Just to say one more word about what is to come, for those of you who've been able to join us over the last few weeks, thank you. Hope you enjoyed today. Our next Beyond Resilience conversation will be July 31st, which is 2 weeks from today. There will be not a program next week, but the one after that on July 31st, you're not going to want to miss. That conversation is entitled After the Call Out Towards Equity, Equality, and Racial Justice. The recent announcement that golfing icon Tiger Woods would be the subject of a two-part HBO documentary series set in motion a heated debate in the doc industry about equity, power, and Black, Indigenous, and other people of color filmmakers' demands for structural change. Join us on the 31st for a conversation with filmmakers Geeta Gondabir, Grace Lee, Marjan Safina, and other members of Brown Girls Doc Mafia as they reflect on the path towards equity, equality, and racial justice in the documentary field. And we will put a link for that conversation, to register for that conversation, in the chat. So please join us on the 31st. I should say I'm joined on screen today by Andrea Lust, who is our ASL interpreter. Thank you, Andrea, for continuing to play that role. And before we get started, we'd like to make a land acknowledgement for the purposes of raising awareness of Indigenous presence and land rights. We all have a responsibility to consider what it means to acknowledge the history and legacy of colonialism. I am right now in Oak Bluffs, Massachusetts, on the land of the Wampanoag people. And we encourage you in the course of this discussion, starting now, to just drop in the chat a word about whose land you are listening in from today. So we'll get a sense of that spread. I'd like to introduce now our moderator for today's conversation. Jason Fitzroy Jeffers is our moderator. Jason is a Miami-based filmmaker and journalist from Barbados originally, whose work primarily focuses on giving voice to the often marginalized stories of the tropics. As a journalist, his work has appeared on The Intercept and in the Miami Herald. As a filmmaker, he has produced award-winning shorts such as Papa Machete, Swimming in Your Skin Again, and Tea, which recently won the Golden Bear at the Berlinale and that have screened at Sundance, BlackStar, TIFF, Sheffield, and more. He is the co-founder and co-executive director of the creative collective Third Horizon, which stages the annual Third Horizon Film Festival, which is a showcase of cinema from the Caribbean, its diasporas, and other underrepresented spaces in the Global South. So Jason, please take it away and get us started.
Thank you so much, Marcia. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I've been looking forward to this conversation all week, as I'm sure many of you have. This is such a delicate moment, but filled with so many possibilities. And I'm excited to talk with our panelists today about how we navigate through it all. I don't want to spend too much time talking about myself. There's a clip I'd like to share about Third Horizon about our festival that just completed its 4th edition in February before the pandemic struck. And now we're very much in the process of plotting our next steps through all of this. So if you could roll that clip and then we'll meet our panelists. Apologies, we're just having some tech trouble there. But I guess I could just go straight into introducing our panelists. So let's start with Jatabia. Jatabia Gary. Jatabia M. Gary is an artist and filmmaker currently living and working in Dallas, Texas. Gary's work seeks to liberate the distorted histories through which Black life is often viewed, while fleshing out a nuanced and multivalent Black interiority. Through documentary film and experimental video art, Gary charts the ways structure of power shape our perceptions around representation, race, gender, sexuality, and violence. In 2017, Gary was named one of Filmmaker magazine's 25 New Faces of Independent Filmmaking. Her award-winning films have screened at festivals, cinemas, and institutions worldwide, including Edinburgh International Film Festival, the Whitney Museum, Hammer Museum, Anthology Film Archives, Atlanta Film Festival, the Schomburg Center, MoMa PS1, Harvard Film Archives, New Orleans Film Festival, Ann Arbor Film Festival, and elsewhere. In 2016, Gary participated in the Tara Foundation Summer Residency Program in Giverny, France. She was a 2018-2019 Radcliffe Fellow at Harvard University. Gary is a 2019 Creative Capital Awardee and a Field of Vision Fellow.
Hi, Jason. Thank you. Thank you to the panel. I'm looking forward to speaking with you all and learning from you all.
Nice.
I think we're going to try to show a clip.
Sure, yeah.
Fingers crossed.
Wow.
Just quickly, that's a clip from the Giverny document, which I just released on YouTube. So you can watch it there if you want. Thank you for showing the clip.
Great. I'll go to my next panel on the screen. John Cesare Goff is a multidisciplinary artist, curator, and arts administrator. He believes cinema has the power to explore the intersection of race, power, identity, gender, and the environment by unearthing the visceral representation of value and authenticity behind the images propelled across varying diasporas. With over 15 years' experience in media and film production, John has an MFA in experimental and documentary arts from Duke University and offered his lens to a variety of projects spanning many genres, including the recently released and award-winning documentaries, including Out in the Night, POV, logo, 2015, Evolution of a Criminal, Independent Lens, 2015, and Spit on the Broom, 2019, among several other projects. He's in production for his feature directorial debut, After Sherman, and is the executive director of the Flaherty International Film Seminars Incorporated. Prior to his position at the Flaherty, John was a museum specialist for film at the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture.
Hey, sorry. Awesome. So glad to be here. Really excited to be a part of this conversation, and I'd like to share a little clip of my work in progress after Sherman. And I think it'll sort of set the tone for my perspective for the discussion today.
I will bring that right up.
I left the church along with your mother around 20 minutes of 8.
I don't usually stay to Bible study. And when I got outside, I talked to Reverend Pinckney, and it was very hot, and he said to me, go home and get something to eat and get out this heat.
I got a phone call from one of the pastors on the district indicating that first of all, there was a shooting near Mother Emanuel.
Well, I thought there was a shooting in the parking lot around the church someplace.
And by the time I was home, maybe 30 minutes, I got the call.
There's some shooting going on down at your church. I could not believe it.
The second phone call was, no, Elder, it's a shooting inside of Mother Emanuel.
Never dawned on me that it was inside the church.
My understanding, he was already in the parking lot. So if he had decided to come into the quarterly conference, it may have been more than 9 who lost their lives on that given evening.
It was very sad. Yeah. It was a very hard time. And yeah, that was a hard time. Because you really just didn't know. And even though I might have known what their name was, and to have to go tell someone that they need to come and talk to the coroner, and to see that happen, that was hard. That was really hard. So it's hard now. They celebrate every year. I wish they wouldn't, because it's a very emotional time. And yeah, don't really like to talk about that much. And it was a long time before I really could.
Show me that stream, called the river of Loyda. That's the old stream that I know.
Wow.
Thank you, John. And so our third panelist is Loyda Limbal, is an Afro-Latina filmmaker and DJ interested in the creation of art that is nuanced and revelatory for communities of color. She's the Senior Vice President of Programs at Firelight Media. Firelight is committed to making films about pivotal moments and moments in the US. Firelight's flagship program, the Documentary Lab, is a fellowship that provides mentorship funding and industry access to emerging filmmakers of color. Limbal's current film, Through the Night, is a feature documentary about a 24-hour daycare center. Through the Night was part of the 2019 Sundance Edit and Story Lab and was selected for world premiere at the 2020 Tribeca Film Festival. Her first film, Estilo Hip Hop, was a co-production of ITVS and aired on PBS in 2009. Additionally, she co-produces and helms the popular Brooklyn Monthly party called Rosie Perez. Limbal received a bachelor's degree in history from Brown University and is a graduate of Third World Newsreel's film and video production training program. She's a Sundance Institute Fellow and a former Ford Foundation Just Films Rockwood Fellow. She lives in the Bronx with her 2 children. Please welcome.
Hi. Hi.
Hey,
Hi,
Loyda.
Jason. Yeah, similarly, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm joining y'all from the Bronx and land of the Lenape people. Really looking forward to being in conversation with y'all. This feels like medicine today, so excited to be here.
Well, before we get started, we do have Loyda's clip, and then I believe we're going to try to show the Third Horizon clip again as well.
Come on, Mama, time to get up. Morning, baby. All right. Noah. Time to get up, Noah. I've been doing this for 22 years. I have all different types of families in my daycare. I have some that comes in at 6 o'clock in the morning that works to 8:30 at night. I have some that comes from 3:30 to 12:30 at night. I have some that comes in overnight. I see a lot of parents come in and break down. They don't want to do this, but they need to go out and work and pay their bills and take care of their family.
All right, I'll see you later. All right, baby, have a good day. Be careful.
This is the way the world is set up at this point.
I work on the night shift in a pediatric emergency room from 7 p.m. to 7:30 a.m. I never really thought of overnight childcare till I had to use it.
What? I've been working 7 days for almost 2 months. If I'm not working one job, I'm working in another job. So I'm always working and working. Nuna's like my other mom. She helped me a lot.
I can't believe you still have kids. You know I have a house full of kids. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Love you guys very much.
Bye.
I see you Monday. I have a Diana, but I don't think you're her bus. Chase, my grandson, yes. Your grandson? My grandson. I didn't know he was going to be on the bus today. Yes. Yes, that's mine.
It's not just a job.
Turn your sheet over.
This is really our life. My whole family has to be involved. My children, ever since they was the age of 2 years old, they had to share me with other children. I remember my children saying, Mommy, why do they have to come first?
Mommy!
As parents, you make sacrifices. It's not their fault that I work the way that I work, so I just do what I can. It's not easy, but you know, eventually I'll sleep.
Do we love each other?
Yeah.
I didn't hear you.
Yeah.
Do we love each other?
I'm a daycare provider, so I'm constantly picking up babies.
Then you have to be careful. If you continue to have numbness, you need surgery.
This work is hard. I don't want to stop doing what I'm doing because I feel like if I lay down, I'm so tired I might not get back up.
Amazing work and amazing clips from all 3 of you. I believe we're going to go back to the first clip, which didn't show correctly, which is Third Horizon Film Festival, the festival that I'm the co-director of. We're a creative collective of Caribbean filmmakers with members primarily in Miami, but New York, London, Barbados, you know, all over the map. We produce work ourselves, but the clip you're going to see is from our festival, which showcases the work of Caribbean filmmakers across the map. So let's talk. As I said, I've been looking forward to this conversation all week. I believe you all have been as well. We had a pre-conversation a few days ago. We had to hold ourselves back a bit because we were really diving into it. So for those of you, let's recap, our topic today, because there have been so many amazing conversations so far. I'm really grateful to Firelight for this series. Today we're going to be talking about how everybody here is navigating the ubiquitous images of Black trauma in this moment, and Lord knows there's quite a lot. How we're documenting Black life and forging new cinematic languages, practices, and formal approaches. Now it strikes me that at least where I stand and where I relate to all of this, it feels like it changes every day because this is such a turbulent moment. So I just want to start by asking, how are y'all doing? Where does this conversation find you today? Because I swear every morning I wake up and there's something else, Well, I mean, I guess I will say that, it's a moment that has provoked so many conflicting emotions, anger, rage, despondency at times, sometimes optimism. But what is particularly difficult is the images of trauma that are being broadcast at us everywhere, right? YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, the doom scrolling, it's everywhere. And while this is a moment that contains so much possibility, there is some concern about what seeing these images, being exposed to these images consistently, what does that do to us? And so let's talk a bit about that, Loyda, your film is of particular relevance right now because it looks at care, it looks at care in our community. And, while it was certainly relevant before the events of the last few months, it's exceptionally relevant now. And how have you been thinking about, how have you been relating to this current moment through your film?
Yeah, I would say I've had a lot of frustration because part of the reason I made the film was I personally believe that to mother, when you are Black and poor, Indigenous, queer, trans, undocumented, is an everyday act of resistance. It's an everyday act of subversion. We keep insisting on the value of our lives and our children's lives in a society that consistently tells us that we are valueless, so we're stubborn. It's like the most subversive kind of stubbornness that you can imagine. That's how I think of mothering within my community and the communities I'm a part of. And I made the film because I wanted to create something that said that unequivocally and unapologetically to other mothers, that I see myself being in community with. So I made it for us because I think that we occupy a kind of a positionality in the society that has normalized us being seen as disposable. We are oftentimes on the front lines of so much different types of violence. So you can be killed while you're trying to give birth, if you're as a Black woman. A sister who maybe most of us here have not heard her name, Shayasia Johnson, was just murdered, literally murdered, right, at Woodhull Hospital in Brooklyn about 2 weeks ago. There's been very, very little coverage. She was giving birth. It was during the course of giving her an epidural. The anesthesiologist calculated the dosage and killed this woman, right? Recently, I also heard about a mother in Alabama who could not pay traffic tickets and was arrested and put into jail for something like a couple hundred days, something like 200 or 300 days. As a result of that, lost her children. Her children were put in the foster care system, and a whole family devastated, right? A whole set of trauma and violence inflicted on all these members of all these families. And I bring those things up to say that in this context of violence and trauma and pain, I think in many ways we are conditioned to only see certain kinds of violence committed against some members of our community. And those members do not include Black women. They don't include Black mothers. They certainly don't include single mothers. And so I made the film for this community, right, that isn't seen, whether in its kind of full complexity, but even the things that are harming us don't get recognized in a communal context oftentimes, even though we're literally on the front lines of all types of institutional, state-sanctioned violence. And then on top of that, interpersonal violence, right? Because the narrative, the trope about the Black single mother in the Black community is still very much like we are to blame for everything that goes wrong, right? It's like the broken family unit, but that fault of that brokenness falls on us. We are criticized, shamed. Everybody has lots of opinions about what we're doing wrong. So anyway, all that to say, I made this film for this community, right? Then now in the COVID-19 context, these same people are the essential workers, right? We had tons of articles talking about Black and Latina, poor and working class women being the people that are keeping the country running, right? Cool, we're talking about them. But my greatest frustration in this moment is that we are still not seeing them, right? We're talking about their labor, and we continue to see them in the ways that we have been taught to see them, which normalizes the violence against them. It normalizes and makes us all feel comfortable accepting the fact that we are accepting, we're essentially accepting that we ask certain members of our community to sacrifice themselves, right? That caring for us, that me having groceries requires her sacrificing herself, And so for me, it's been I've been really angry about that. It's like at once this community, these people that I love so dearly that are in my community, that are my family, my neighbors, my sisters, my homies, are at the tip of everyone's tongue, but they're like reduced and like not seen, and the kind of the contradiction in that is enraging. And sometimes it's like, it feels like the rage is gonna consume me. So that's how I've been navigating that in this particular moment.
Thank you for sharing.
Sorry.
I was coming to you anyway, so.
I want to respond to Loyda, and I want to lift up Loyda for the work that she does and has done and continues to do. Not just the administrative kind of midwifing that you have done for all of these Black and Brown and POC filmmakers, but also this really dynamic and transformative creative and filmmaking practice that you have. Watching this clip, I sat there and was like completely overcome with emotion, because this moment for me is a moment of having to like really, really prioritize. And we've said care a lot, I say care a lot, but I'm going to say care again, you know, really prioritize the type of care that we're doing for ourselves and for the people around us. This idea of things having to come to a halt, things having to stop, right? And no business as usual. And this kind of recalibrating of a tempo and a pace has, for me, really, really brought to the fore the need, the fact that I was not caring for myself in a really intentional way. So to see this work that Loyda has done, and I look at it and I wonder, well, why the fuck was this film not everywhere? You know what I'm saying? Like all of these fucking solidarity statements that all of these festivals and organizations are releasing about how they are, you know, in lockstep with us. And it's like, well, this film should have been platformed even before we got to this situation, right? Because it's so, like, if y'all mean what y'all say about being for the people, right? About being on the side of the people, then this sort of work should have been at all of the major festivals. And I know you were at Tribeca and we applaud that, that's amazing, but it should have been everywhere. You know what I'm saying? Like if y'all are about what y'all say y'all are about, then this type of work where we're privileging and prioritizing and platforming the lives of, you know, Black and brown women who, like she said, have kept this country moving at the expense of their own lives, at the expense of their children's lives. So this idea of care, it's just so pivotal in the interpersonal, in the very small ways, the very banal ways, but also in the grand ways. So I feel like this sort of imagery, this sort of storytelling that we see coming from Loyda, coming from many, many Black women, should be all over the place. We shouldn't have to be arguing and fighting and in the Facebook comments section asking these white folks why they want to take up so much space in this narrative, you know, in these narratives, you know, like, and telling these stories. Everybody, no more solidarity statements, abdicate power, give up power, and redistribute your resources. Because it's just talk at this point, you know what I'm saying? And I'm getting a little off, but I'm heated, like Loyda, I'm angry.
Oh, you're not getting off at all.
I feel some type of way, you know what I'm saying? Because there's just gonna be more and more of these statements. There's just gonna be more and more of this like, oh, well, you know, had I have known, give up your power and reallocate your resources. That's how we begin to do transformative work.
Amen to that. Amen to that. Well, I was going to, you know, with that in mind, I was going to come to you next to ask you about, you know, I remember watching Giverny I, Négresse Impériale last year, and the images of you juxtaposed of you in the garden and, you know, everything that was happening over here stateside. It seems that you really have been, you know, reflecting on this care for yourself and how to navigate trauma for some time now. And I'm just wondering if there are what has struck you, maybe personally or in community in this moment, you know? These are things you've been studying for a long time, but what strikes you now?
Yeah, I've been dealing with, and you know what, I've had to answer for it. I've had to talk about my work. That's the thing, when you get, like a lot of our rich and famous faves, they can just drop their work and, you know, they don't have to answer about it. But I'm in a position where I give artist talks and I have to speak about the choices that I make. I am held accountable by members of the community, by young people in universities and colleges. And they want to know, well, what do you mean by using this Diamond Reynolds footage with you in a garden? Like, help me contextualize that, because a lot of the work that I do is experimental, right? It's conceptual. There is no kind of narrative through line. You have to bring that as the viewer. So yeah, I've been considering my use and the practice of using archival imagery that depicts and shows Black people in traumatic circumstances or in the throes of violence, but obscuring it, right? There's this kind of right to opacity that I grant the victim. I withhold. In fact, it's a philosophy of refusal. So although I might be using documentation, whether it's surveillance or surveillance of a Black person dying or a Black person violence being visited upon our bodies, there is a withholding there, right? For example, in Giverny I, Négresse Impériale, and throughout the Giverny suite, there is this Philando Castile, Diamond Reynolds moment, but we only hear her. We don't see him. We don't see his body. And that for me is really important because I feel like you can generate whatever emotional response you're attempting to get at, whatever intellectual impulse you're attempting to get at, whatever comment you're trying to make about state violence or white violence, you can do that without re-traumatizing Black people. And I've said this multiple times and I'll continue to say it. Not everybody feels this way. So there are people who make amazing things. They make amazing films and they do use the violence. And it's very spectacular. I'm interested in the banality of this sort of violence, which is what Loyda was also talking about, the kind of everyday of it, right? The fact that it's like always there, you know, like it's just there. You see what I'm saying? So I think there is a way of facing these things, but without rubbing our nose in the mess. There is a way of addressing these things. There is a way of keeping our heads up and not burying our heads in the sand, but without doing continual psychic harm, like the news, right? When George Floyd died, when he was murdered, excuse me, the news is going to show you this over and over and over again. Well, why? Who's getting off on that? A lot of people are getting off on seeing a Black man on the ground and a cop's knee on his neck. I'm not interested in titillating a white supremacist. I'm interested in getting Black people and galvanizing Black people to rethink about how we live in this space, find the historical through line of the things that have been happening to us and our predecessors, and reconfigure a way out of this mess. So that's what I'm attempting to do. And that's why when I use this shit, I'm having to really think about it very deeply. These are deliberate choices because I want the viewer to think about it deeply.
Yeah, and I think the banality, the everydayness of it is what's incredibly important, especially for people within our industry and our sphere who question how can systemic change occur within the industry, but before we can even have that, we must have systemic change in the everyday lives of Black and brown people. So in the 6 years that I've been making after Sherman, I had, within the production itself, domestic terrorism, racial violence, which murdered one of the mentors for my project, Senator Pinckney. We had torrential flooding, which happens all the time in Charleston, but we were literally stranded in a portion of Charleston with our crew for over 24 hours, you know? But this is an everyday reality. I had deaths of other people who participated in the project. My cousin Bunny, who was a Gullah Uman, who was sort of the cultural liaison spiritually for my project. And I mean, the list goes on. And then we had COVID-19. We had the murder of Walter Scott, which is actually the last murder that I watched in the public media. You know, and this happened right before the shooting at Mother Emanuel in 2015. So I haven't seen the murder of Black people surveillance in 5 years. But when George Floyd was murdered, my friends reached out to me in a way that they had never before. Grown Black men in tears. And I didn't understand because I have not seen the footage, but the trauma that is reenacted upon us each time these images are propelled through space is very real. And that has nothing to do with us being artists and filmmakers, because we have to get through that before we can even tell our stories and make our work. And so when other people are able to helicopter in, be it the news or other documentarians with more resources, and produce projects in a shorter span of time and put it out into space, and people are like, well, I thought that was your story. It doesn't even matter because what we're dealing with is an intimacy, you know, that has no mediality to it. You can't produce it. You can't produce the intimacy of my mother having to go to 9 family members and tell them that their loved one had been killed. And it took me 4.5 years to even get the courage to ask her to speak about that on camera, because then I have to be concerned about how those images will be manipulated in the future beyond my control. Like once it's complete and it's distributed and it leaves my hands and other people are left to interpret that pain. And so there's a lot of consideration that goes into how we deal with Black trauma on screen, because the gaze, you know, once it leaves our hands, media bias is real. You know, like Jatovia said, there's somebody getting off in those images. Me and the terrorist who walked into my family's church visited many of the same historical sites, but saw 2 very different histories. And so how can I be reading a plaque that says this is the point in which over 40% of American slaves disembarked, and a murderer can take a picture next to it as a sense of pride? You know, and so these are the deeper issues that we're unable to address because often our voices don't accompany our work. Maybe in an artist talk, but when it's streaming, when the clips are taken out of context, when images are juxtaposed next to other works that may have no relevance to what we're speaking about, but they're saying, this is a Black body, that's a Black body, maybe these things go together, which 2 look alike. You know, so there's a lot of work that we have to do just to gain control of our image once it leaves our hands.
And, you know, I want to jump on that if I can. I think too, like for me, I'm ultimately today, as you know, a 41-year-old mother of 2 people, like I'm really interested in how we see ourselves and creating work that offers us different angles to see ourselves, to see each other, not educate other people about our experience or our lives, like how we see each other, you know, and I don't want our gaze towards each other to continue to be limited by the limited imaginations of white supremacy, right? I'll give you a concrete example. We did a fundraiser for daycares that are taking care of the children of essential workers right now. And we ended up getting some influencer type people, some very high profile white women, saw the trailer, were moved by it, decided to share it, and decided to have their followers, you know, invite them to donate. So we're seeing this happens organically. It wasn't planned. We didn't know these people beforehand. We're seeing this play out, and people are adding kind of comments and instructions to their followers. So one woman told her followers, you should donate to this. You know, these poor kids have to sleep on mats on the floor. You know, make a donation so we can buy beds for this daycare. That was nowhere in our language. There is nothing poor about these kids or these people or this community. There is no deficit in this daycare center. Mm. You know, like this daycare center to me is actually an example of mutual aid, self-determination, right? Like solidarity in practice every day. It is a concrete modern day example of how we have survived the consistent campaign of genocide against our people. These are the things that we have always done. These are the ways that we actually do take care of each other. And as much pain and harm and trauma that is inflicted on us, if we were not also experts in living and also experts in care, we would not be here today. There would be no Black people, right? The campaign of genocide would have succeeded. Mm-hmm. And so there's no deficit in this community. But in my head, when I saw that comment, I was like, that's the only way that she can see poor and working class Black and brown folks. This woman has no other framework, you know, to understand, to even view us through. Right. That's her problem. I feel bad for her, right? But I don't want us to be constrained, you know, by their lack of imagination, right? their poverty of imagination around what our humanity is, looks like, and feels like, you know? And so your point, Jatavia, about like withholding, you know, as we were making through the night, we had people constantly tell us, you know, different funders or partners or people that were giving us feedback as we were, you know, working our way through the thing, asking for like details about like, so what happened, you know, with Marisol and her husband? Like, so why doesn't her husband contribute? And in the film, we made the conscious choice to not give anyone any information about anyone's relationship status.
Right.
Like, that ain't your business. And again, that's all you care about, because you are trained to only see us within these very limited and poor, you know, frameworks. And we're much more than that. And so I'm not going to feed into that and give you that, because on top of that, I also know that it doesn't matter how much we expose. You know, thinking about the Philando Castile, we saw that in real time. There was a 4-year-old child. His girlfriend was in the car. We saw a whole family undergo, right, this murder. And it wasn't enough. So like exposition, right, of our greatest pains, of our greatest traumas is not enough to convince them of anything. And it's hurtful and harmful for us. So I'm not peddling in that. I'm not interested in doing that, you know?
Right, so I didn't realize how we are running out of time here. So I would like to transition to the Q&A, but this is an important question and where I wanted to make sure we took this conversation. Zion asks, what brings you joy in restoration? And, you know, a few days ago when we were talking, we talked a bit about how this work can be injurious to us, but it can also help us heal. And so how does this work also help us not only heal ourselves, but extend that healing to our community? How do you find that? How do you do that dance in the work between injury and restoration, healing? Jatavi?
Well, for me, the actual act of making it can be, if I'm doing it right, a kind of healing modality for myself, particularly the analog process of etching and painting on film strips. Whenever I'm doing any sort of meticulous and tedious work with my hands, there's a kind of meditative state that I kind of slip into. The flip side of it is it's very difficult work that I'm doing, particularly right now, this film about my family. It's causing me to have to excavate, you know, go burrow very down deep, you know, like there's therapy involved. There's these very intense, very intimate conversations and confessions with family members. But on the other side of that, for me, is the goal of healing frontwards and backwards, right? Healing that line, that entire line. Not saying that this entire healing rests upon my own shoulders. This is a collaborative process. My subjects, my family members are my collaborators. So the entire project is wrapped up in our eventual healing, right? Hopefully, this is something that, you know, I'm getting at. The goal is not necessarily to win the Oscar. The goal is to, you know, have us be able to sit amongst each other and reason together without, you know, heated arguments or bringing up the past, or, you know, the ability to tell the truth, the ability to meet each other in vulnerable spaces and be our actualized selves. So there are many things that are bringing me joy right now. I have a spiritual practice that's keeping me really grounded. I told a friend the other day, I would have jumped, there's a huge window here, I would have jumped out of that window 3 months ago if I didn't have a spiritual practice. I grew up very religious, and I of course strayed from Pentecostal, but I have a different religious practice that's very Black and very African and very ancient, and it is keeping me grounded, as are books, as are baths, as are Zoom calls with my friends, therapy sessions, learning to cook, learning the piano. There are many, many things that this moment of rest, right, of upheaval, but of rest, have granted me. And one of those is the ability to turn interior, to turn to the inside and really focus on those things that, you know, we often run from and hide from with our work and our schedules and our deadlines.
John? The dance between the joy and the restoration and the potential trauma that comes in doing the work itself.
Yeah, I think my joy and my care comes through reflecting reflecting beautiful images of my people and creating new images where there were none. So people think Gullah Geechee people are some mystical people of the past, and you know, and they got to wear a costume or look like a slave. But really, it's 40% of the people came through the U.S. Slave trade, and so we look like everyday Black people. So that's really important. And so it's always confused me in different neighborhoods I've lived, be it Harlem or Brooklyn or Atlanta or Los Angeles, where other people would go and point a camera on the same corner I lived and see a whole nother existence, you know? And I'm like, well, did you miss everything else around you? Because if all you see is this violent image and you're willing to reflect that back to the world, or to hold that up as a truth of what exists in a space, then it's a shame, because you're missing all the other lived experiences that are happening if all you gotta do is turn your head a little to the left or a little to the right, but your gaze is seeking out those images that are violent, that replicate the violence of which people are experiencing, mainly because your access is so limited. You have no invitation into the interiority of people's experiences. So you're always capturing the lowest hanging fruit, you know, and the depth of the Black experience is so rich, and it goes beyond anything that this capitalist experience can validate. And so you may look at a child with no shoes walking down the street and be like, oh, how sad, like Loyda was saying, but this child is feeling the earth between their toes, you know, something that you have never experienced. And so this is what I hope to reflect back, and this is what gives me strength to continue on, because I've brought portions of my work back to the community down here in the Low Country, you know, over the years, and people are just happy to see themselves, happy to see their friends and their family and say, that's me. Because why? It doesn't exist anywhere else in the media, in entertainment or in news journalism.
Loyda, what brings you rescue?
Yeah, I would say similarly, you know, like doing the work, you know, there's like a James Baldwin quote where he talks about, like, I think something along the lines, I'm paraphrasing here, so don't be mad if I get it wrong. Something about like all good art is a form of confession. And that's something that's like proving to be really true for me with Through the Night. Like there are these things that, like for example, I said to myself at the outset, I wanted to make something that was revelatory for everyone involved or connected to the film, right? And that started with myself, with our team, which was deliberately an all women of color team, with the protagonists of the film and audiences. That again, thinking about, like in my head, I made this film for like thinking of like grandmas that fan themselves with their skirt and that sit on stoops or on porches. Like that in my head was who I was making this for, like that grandmother, or like homegirls that wear bamboo earrings, or kids that play in fire hydrants. Like that's the audience that I imagined as I was making this thing. And I wanted to create something that they could watch and like feel like something new or different about their everyday, right? Again, back to the banal, right? Like the everyday existence was transformed, you know, for them. And so in thinking about that, I set out with that kind of premise, or that as a goal, right? As a stated goal. I didn't know where that would lead. And ultimately where it's led me, and particularly in this moment of, you know, so much upheaval, has been the realization that like, I wanted to create a film experience, a cinematic experience that felt like the care that we provide to each other, like the care that we provide to our children, that watching the film could feel like that for Black and brown women. And in my exchanges now around the film with women from my community, the responses that I'm getting have ultimately led me to this place of like grappling with the fact that like, if I feel like my sisters are worthy of this type of care that I so deeply desire for them, and this kind of tenderness, that like I have to see myself as worthy of those things too. And that's been the revelation for me in this process, which does feel like it's a journey, it's a healing journey, you know?
Well, there's a question here from Jaime, which is for you, Loyda, but I'm going to expand it a bit again to address something that we touched on the other day. Loyda, the question is, how do you consistently check yourself and your collaborators to make sure your work is not a response to whiteness or white supremacy? What I'd like to expand that to take in is, we discussed the other day that in this healing, does this bring us to a place where we can see beyond white supremacy, where we can see beyond all that is continually imposed upon us every day? How do we get there? Do you see the potential for that in this moment? So let's reel it back for you, Loyda, and then we can just take off on it, all of us, however we care to respond.
Yeah, so for me, luckily, I still live in the neighborhood that the same people I'm making the work for are in. So I'm in it every day. And so to the question of how do you make sure your work is not a response, it's like, you know, I love being from the Bronx. Y'all know that because y'all have heard me say this a million times. I am inspired and like fascinated consistently by our folks and our environment and what we do and how we breathe and move and walk and dance and talk. And so being in this community is the consistent reminder for me of like, this is who I'm creating for, you know, which again, you know, I'm essentially creating for myself. You know, and you can think what you will of that, but like, that's the big realization for me at the end of the day, you know, that there are things that I'm trying to process and heal from and understand and navigate, you know.
Sorry, excuse
and I
me.
want to.
I'm sorry, Laura, one sec. I just wanted to let everybody know we're extending the conversation by another 15 minutes. It was supposed to end at 3, but you know, obviously this is a lively conversation. We want to keep it going. I'm sorry, Loyda, please continue.
No, it's all good. I was just gonna say to end that thought that I'm doing it for myself, but I want to. It's work that I want to do, that I want to do in collective. You know, it's like things that I want to process and heal from collectively, right? So that's the constant check for me. And then the second part of the conversation, maybe we can go to other folks and I'll circle back.
Okay.
On it.
John?
This is actually not sure a direct answer, but I wanted to make sure I say this. You know, I started this work attempting to do something experimental just as an inquiry into space and heritage, which caused me to continue to return to South Carolina specifically, like my family's home place, my home place. And to continue to return to the site of trauma was the original experiment that I engaged with, you know, and in doing so, surprised, there was more trauma. So I was trying to understand the historical significance of whether or not peace could be made with both the site of home and the site of bondage, you know, and so this is true for people all across the world, you know. Like, can those two things, ideas, be held within the same place? Just as Black people with our double consciousness must hold within the same breath, you know, patriotism and anger, you know, it's like, can this happen? You know, and so in the act of returning to the site, you know, and returning to the people, you know, unfortunately, I don't live in the community in which I do most of my work anymore. I live in New York now, but South Carolina is essentially my home, and I'll unpack that later in my film. But it's like the ability to return, because there's this false idea that white supremacy ran Black people away to the point that they can never return to their, you know, families' home, be it in the South, the global South, Caribbean, rest of the Americas. And I think that is what I'm attempting to work through, you know, and the form in which it's taken happens to be a documentary, but I've made many types of artworks inspired by sort of this larger quest of reckoning. So I'm pretty sure I didn't answer the question at all, but that's sort of what Loyda sort of brought into my mind when she was speaking.
Well, thank you for sharing. And Jatavia, moving beyond the trauma, do you see potential for that in this moment that we're all in? It's tricky, right? Because we see so much performative allyship, we see so much performative response to our trauma and our pain in this moment. I see some people who are optimistic. I see others who are very despondent. I've been both of those people in the last few weeks. Do you see the potential for us to move beyond this in this moment? Do you find that through your work as you heal and address yourself and your traumas, making your work? Oh wait, you're here. Yeah,
you see the potential for us to move beyond what? This current. Yeah,
this current, you know, the trap of white supremacy, of the trauma that we're encased in.
Yeah. During our pre-discussion, Loyda said that she was both, you know, optimistic, but also a pessimist. I think I'm paraphrasing. And I remember thinking to myself, wow, exactly, you know, and she mentioned that because she says she has children, and that's why, you know, she's optimistic. She has to be. And Baldwin speaks about that too. Like, I have to have hope. There are children out here, you know, I have to be able to look them in their face and tell them that there's going to be something else aside from this, you know, kind of constant meat grinder, you know? So a part of me is the same. A part of me is, you know, very optimistic, understanding that all things change, understanding that, you know, we can't continue on like this because this is unsustainable. The world is already breaking down. The earth is already shutting down, right? We're 30 years too late in some people's estimations. But a part of me also remains incredibly optimistic and incredibly hopeful, you know, as someone whose work is interested in kind of prefiguring a future way of being. I have to be hopeful. I have to use all of my creative visualization powers in order to conceive of a space that's without subjugation and without, you know, constant bloodshed and without the precarity of premature death, you know? So a part of me is extremely hopeful. And I think that that's where the work comes in, even though a lot of people will say, well, your work is so political and it's so angry and there's all of this, you know, kind of violence, whether it's hinted at or whether it's explicit. And that's true, because I feel like that's the reality of the situation, you know? I want to make a love story someday, but right now this is a space that I find myself in, you know? This is my context. So I'm responding to that context, but hoping to, like I said earlier, encourage a response in the viewer. You know, I'm trying to get the viewer to think a certain way or to move a certain way and to be a certain way. I'm trying to free them up a little bit. So in that goal, there has to be hope. You know, there is hope in that goal that we can all kind of shift, specifically Black people. I'm talking to Black people, that we can shift what's going on inside of us so that we can begin to shift what's happening on the outside. And that's all very kind of abstract, but I think they know what I'm talking about.
That resonates a lot for me as well. You know, I think that the thing with my children that is interesting is that they're both like at once, like their reaction to what's happening is like they're appalled because to them it is so nonsensical, right? Because they're children, so they haven't learned how to normalize any of this yet, and so in their heads they're like, you know, this is wild. And through their gaze, I get to sort of see hope and feel hope and optimism. And I then also feel like I'm forced to, you know, follow their lead because they're children and it's not, you know, it's not fair for me. I don't have the right to crush their spirits, right? With all of the burdens and all the traumas that I carry already. And so I'm in that stance with them, but it's like tricky, you know, like a couple of days ago, my son, who's 9 now, asked me, I don't know, my computer's doing something strange here that I didn't tell it to do. Sorry about that. my son asked me if, out of nowhere, we were not talking about anything that's going on. He said, but you know, Mom, like the police won't kill you if you're with your children, right? And I was driving and he was in the back seat and I thought about Philando Castile. And I deadass had to like pull over and stop and decide in that moment like what my response was gonna be. But it was like so triggering because I automatically thought about Philando Castile. I was literally in a car with my kids in the back seat and my child was asking me like, we'll basically like what I heard was like, we'll save you, we can protect you, our presence protects you, you know? And just, you know, that, right? Like having to figure out how to respond, you know, to that, right? It's like you confront what your perspective is and what you truly believe, you know, like, am I lying to my kids or, you know, to protect them or, you know, what do I do? But like, you know, holding that, and this is something I want to say here, and I think Jatavia like talked about it, you know, with the performative solidarity, slightly off topic, but I feel it's connected. Like, for folks to understand that, like, this is what Black folks are living and experiencing. Like, this is what it means, you know, for us. And so, you know, for white folks in our industry that are all having this kind of moment of reckoning or awakening or understanding, it's like this, you know, and I've had many one-on-one conversations with white folks that want to be allies right now in the documentary industry and have confessed, like, I realized I didn't get it. I realized I didn't fully understand. I realized I am understanding in a new way. That's great. But when you're interacting with Black folks, like, the thing to bear in mind is that, like, you are all having this awakening at the same time. And so you all want to have these conversations at the same time, which means that that means that for the Black folks that are in your circle, you are asking them to be on these back-to-back Zoom calls with you, right? As you try to understand, you know, and navigate. Meanwhile, we are like just really like in like a place of like survival, you know, right now, because these things that are happening are not abstractions for us. They're not removed, you know, incidents that happen somewhere else that then we have to like read an article about and try to understand, you know, and just to say around the performative solidarity piece, like there's so much urgency right now. Everyone is trying to solve endemic, right, social ills. And y'all want to do it on the timeline of the news cycle. Because be very clear that every Black person that I know in this space feels like the white folk solidarity statements, the attention, the concern will move on. It is not going to last. We all know that it has an expiration date. Those are the conversations we're having with each other when white folks are not around. And I'm telling y'all now, I'm like sharing the tea. And so for you, if you are a white person listening in that wants to be an ally, like perhaps instead of the vague, empty solidarity statement, like I'd be much more interested in statements that where you reveal how you have been complicit, where you do the work of examining yourself, your institution, what your role has been, and develop some analysis around it, and then share that. And then
please don't collect this Black liberation.
And then make a long-term commitment. Tell me that you do not believe that we are going to solve these endemic social issues in the same time frame of the news cycle, right? Because otherwise, I'm at the point where I'm not going to be on another Zoom call with y'all, you know? Because there's a difference between wanting to actually make structural change and just doing damage control, right? And what y'all are doing, and on the timeline that y'all are on, it looks like damage control, you know? And I wanted to say that piece about the performative, you know, because it like stands in such contrast to what Black folks are experiencing, what they need, what they desire, you know, and what we're living in this moment. Like there's this big dissonance, you know?
The thing that strikes me,
I think that's the greatest lie that's been told in this moment as white people discover Black liberation and Black freedom that we haven't been on this quest since the 1500s. There's never been a point in American history when Black people have not been actively engaged in their own liberation. It did not come from white solidarity. Like the white abolitionist movement is not what freed Black slaves. Black people were involved in that movement from the very beginning. And there has been an erasure of that. There has been an erasure of the ontology of the unbroken chain of freedom fighters. This assumption that Black Lives Matters is the first time that anybody ever stood up and said, Black Lives Matters is a lie. It's a lie. I'm so happy these young people are doing it relentlessly, but I want others to know that there has never been a moment in American history where Black people did not speak up for themselves, where they did not hold each other accountable, where there was not mutual aid, when we did not build and for ourselves, you know? And so when you approach the situation as if, how can we help facilitate your liberation? There's already a problem that's occurring. A statement of Black solidarity, as if every Black person in your company or your organization has not been talking about what the organization could do and giving you meaningful suggestions along the way that just fell upon deaf ears because it was not the popular topic of the moment. So we need to correct this idea that this is a new history. So the question around, are you a futurist? You know, I think we all need to be historic excavators, you know, or archaeologists, or, you know, whatever it is, in the sense that there are so many missing narratives in the Black experience that would do so much to help both the understanding of Black people in our current situation, but also other people who are trying to understand what's going on. It did not just happen yesterday. There are documents, there is evidence, there are artifacts. But we need to recontextualize the narrative, because the white supremacy that hijacked the narrative of our experience is embedded in the archive. Mm-hmm. So if I go and search for Black dances of the 18th century, it's categorized wrong. They didn't even know it was a dance, or religious experiences. You know, they're like, oh, their body was moving in some way. You know, and is this a spiritual experience? Is this dance? Is this schizophrenia? You know, because they didn't have the gaze to understand what they were seeing, they documented it wrong. And so when we go back to try to recover those narratives, we can't even find it half the time. So there's so much work to be done in the past to speed this present moment, to make it visible, that, like, you know, it's like, it's hard to think about the future because we're telling the wrong story about the past.
Right. Well, we're actually at time.
That's a shame.
It is a shame because we could keep going, you know, to Loyda saying, you know, so many people are trying to do damage control right now. This damage can't be controlled. Like, there's no control in it. It is erupting. It's going to keep going. We're going to ensure that. Where can everybody find your work? I don't want to stop. I feel like we're just getting started. But
I feel like let Tavia say what she was about to say. Come on, I want to hear it. Yeah, come on, Jason, let her rock.
I just wanted to respond to John because he's right. He's right. This idea that the narrative, right? Because we have historically been in a position of power to shape the narrative. Documentary is a colonial project, and he's talking about this unbroken line of resistance and freedom fighters, and how resistance looks. And I think it's important to point out that resistance looks many, many different ways, and it has historically. There are folks who will talk, there are folks who will campaign, and then there are people that will burn things down and they will loot. And we have to understand that there's a legitimacy behind that. I said that. There's a legitimacy behind that, especially if we're talking about we're in a capitalist context. So to loot, to take something, that's a resistance, right? To steal yourself, right? To steal away is a resistance. Harriet Tubman was looting. She was taking people who were considered property. So when we're talking about this unbroken line of resistance and the narrative of that resistance, let's free it all the way up. Let's free it all up. All of that shit is relevant and all of that shit is legitimate.
Yep. And to add to that line, caregiving
Caregiving
is resistance.
Absolutely.
Right? Like me saying, I'm told you're worthless, you're valueless, but I'm gonna pour everything that I have into you. I'm going to nurture you. And I don't say that in a romantic, sort of simple, reductive way, idea of motherhood. Plenty of people are harmed by their mamas, right? We know that. But even if you're a person who splits part ways with your own biological mother, somewhere, somehow, some Black woman or femme will pour into you. Somebody will mother you, right? And that's freedom fighting too.
Absolutely.
Love and forgiveness is
read it all.
Love and forgiveness is resistance. I forgive America for being the racist country it is. And I can still love it. I forgive the fact that we have an idiot for a president. I can forgive that. I can still love us all through that. And that's my resistance. I'm gonna forgive the fact that we have all endured systemic racism, whether you're aware of it or not. But that doesn't stop me from loving someone or wanting this world to be a better place or caring for people. So until we can get to that place where we can say, where we can tell the truth and accept and say, this is a universal fact. This industry is racist. I still love it. I still want to work in it. It's still very racist, but people think that because it's something negative and something bad that you can't love through it. As Jatavia said that there are people who that the world would like to outcast, but their value is inherent. And if you can't love them, you are not a freedom fighter.
I don't forgive this country, but that's just me.
I don't either. I was gonna say, John, I feel like I want to be part of a series of conversations with you. Like I want that workshop around forgiveness. I'm not in that.
I mean,
place.
I don't forget what this country has done, but in order for me to move on, in order for me to walk the streets that I walk for me, where the Klan gathered in my father's hometown every year up until I was alive in the mid-90s, in order for me to just walk down the street and not blow it all up, I have to forgive. Or else I would have jumped out the window and burnt it all down a long time ago.
Texas, baby. This is like, this is one big plantation. So I hear you and I'm with you, but I serve some vengeful gods, I serve some vengeful gods. So continue.
Come through Ogun.
but they're all encased in the same God. They're all manifestations of one divine love, and so there is vengeance.
I hear you.
There is wrath, but there's all all there.
Vengeance is mine, said the Lord. Unfortunately, we are out of time. We're well past time. I love y'all. Please continue to take care of yourselves.
Thank you, Firelight.
Thank you, Firelight.
Folks. Thank you so much to all of you.
Thank y'all. So dope. Thank you for your generosity of spirit and of presence today. Appreciate y'all.
Love all y'all. Thank you.
Bye, y'all.
Thank you for joining us for this week's episode of Beyond Resilience. Thank you to Jason, our moderator, and our panelists, Shatavia, John, and Loyda, as well as our ASL interpreter, Andrea. Join us for our next Beyond Resilience conversation entitled After the Callout Towards Equity, Equality, and Racial Justice, happening on July 31st. Please note that Beyond Resilience series will now occur every other week at 2 p.m. Eastern. See the link in chat to register, and also please visit firelightmedia.tv for more info on the series.